Okay, so lumber grading, huh? Looks like you've been doing your homework. We've got articles here, guides, even some stuff about AI and job hunting. You're not messing around.
And it's a really interesting time to be looking at this field. It's not just about like old school timber yards anymore. Technology's really shaking things up.
Right. That's what we're all about here, getting past the surface, beyond the job postings, really understanding what it takes to be not just a lumber grader, but a great one.
We'll dig into the skills that really make a difference, the day-to-day stuff you won't find in a brochure, and yeah, how tech is changing the game.
Speaking of tech, some of these articles mention computerized saws and scanners, even software that analyzes wood grain. One even said it's like the software is reading the wood's DNA. What's
Yeah.
that about?
It really is amazing. Imagine a sensor scans a plank and picks up on these tiny variations in the grain, even little knots you can barely see. And that data tells you about the wood's strength, its stiffness, how stable it'll be. Really precise stuff.
So no more just eyeballing it.
Exactly. This technology is taking out some of the guesswork, making things much more accurate and efficient. But human expertise is still so important.
I was going to say, the articles mention communication skills a lot too. Why is that so important if you're mostly focused on, well, wood?
Because you're dealing with people too, right?
Hmm.
All throughout the process. You might have to explain to a sawmill operator why a batch of lumber isn't up to snuff, or reassure a customer that they're getting good quality. Being able to communicate clearly makes all the difference.
Yeah, it's all about collaboration, making sure everyone's on the same page when it comes to quality and standards. Speaking of which, the articles mention different grading systems for the wood. What's the deal with that?
Good question. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, you see. Different wood species, different uses. They all have their own grading systems.
So, like, a piece of oak for a fancy table wouldn't be graded the same way as a pine 2x4 for construction.
Exactly. Some systems, say for hardwoods used in furniture, really focus on appearance, things like the grain pattern, the color, if there are any blemishes. Other systems, like for construction lumber, they're all about strength, making sure it's structurally sound above all else.
Well, yeah, you don't want a support beam collapsing because it had a pretty grain.
Exactly. And that's why understanding all these different systems is so important. You need to know what to look for, what matters most, and how to use that knowledge to make smart decisions about each piece of lumber.
It's like you have to learn the language of lumber. Now, the articles painted a pretty vivid picture of sawmills and lumber yards. It sounds like it's physically demanding. Is it a dead-end job, or can you actually build a career from it?
It definitely is physical. You're on your feet a lot, often outside, handling heavy planks. But it's also really rewarding, working with this natural material, seeing the results of what you do. And as for building a career, oh yeah, there's definitely room to grow.
So wait, you're saying I could start out as a lumber grader and end up, like, managing a whole team? Or inspecting lumber for some huge construction project?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You could become a lead inspector, maybe a quality control supervisor, even move into a management role at a sawmill or a lumberyard. And don't forget about specialization. If you become a real expert in a certain type of wood or a specific grading system, you can really carve out a niche for yourself that way.
Okay, you've got my attention. But back to the day-to-day for a second. The articles mentioned all kinds of tools, not just using your eyes, right?
Right.
What's the coolest piece of lumber grading tech out there?
Well, you talked about scanners and software, but have you ever heard of a moisture meter?
A moisture meter.
Yeah. They sound kind of basic, but they're super important. You see, the amount of moisture in wood, it can really change how strong and stable it is. Too much moisture, and you get warping, rot, even structural failure down the line.
So you're using the moisture meter to make sure the wood's dry enough, ready to be used.
Exactly. Different species, different grades, they all have their own moisture requirements. A good lumber grader knows all those, uses the meter to make sure each piece is within the right range.
That's so interesting. The articles also talked about calipers. Are those just for measuring the wood, like double checking the size?
It's more than that, believe it or not. We're talking about being really precise. Even a tiny difference in thickness or width can affect the wood's strength, especially when you're talking about building something. A good caliper helps a grader spot those little variations that could make a big difference.
So attention to detail is super important in this job. It's not just sorting wood, it's like understanding the science of it too.
That's it, exactly. Having a good understanding of wood science, the mechanics of it, even a bit of engineering, those are all incredibly valuable for a lumber grader.
And speaking of valuable, those AI-powered job platforms like RoleCatcher that the articles mention, those seem pretty valuable too. How do they actually work?
They're really amazing tools. It's like having a personal career coach, almost. You upload your resume, tell it what your skills are, and the platform analyzes tons of job descriptions to find the best matches for you.
So if I'm interested in lumber grading, RoleCatcher could, what, connect me with companies that are looking for someone with my background?
Exactly. It'll even give you feedback on your resume, suggest skills to highlight, even give you practice interview questions specific to lumber grading jobs.
Wow, that's wild. Takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. Now, I'm curious about something else the articles touched on. Sustainable forestry practices. What does that have to do with lumber grading?
Oh, that's a huge part of it, and it's only getting more important in the industry. You see, lumber grading isn't just about the wood itself. It's also about making sure it came from forests that are managed responsibly.
So it's not just about knots and splits and all that. It's about the bigger picture, how our choices affect the environment.
Exactly. People care more and more these days about where their wood comes from. They want to know that the furniture they're buying, the lumber used to build their house, it didn't come at the cost of destroying forests or harming wildlife.
That makes a lot of sense. So a lumber grader who knows about sustainable forestry, that's a valuable asset to a company these days.
For sure. They can help make sure the lumber being used not only meets quality standards, but also ethical and environmental ones too. It's about being part of the solution, making the whole industry more sustainable.
I like that. Okay, now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Or maybe I should say, the robot in the lumber yard. The articles hinted that automation is changing things up. Should aspiring lumber graders be worried about robots taking their jobs?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question these days, isn't it? It's true. Automation is becoming more common in the lumber industry, but
Mhm.
human expertise, that's still essential, at least for now.
It's not really a question of if, but how technology is going to change the job.
Exactly. Think of it more like a collaboration, not robots replacing humans entirely. Robots might be able to do some of the more repetitive tasks, like sorting the wood at first or measuring. But you still need humans for the complex grading decisions, quality control, and for communicating with suppliers and customers.
So it's not about being scared of the robots, it's about learning how to work with them.
Exactly. Anyone who wants to be a lumber grader these days, they should be excited about these new technologies, see them as tools that can actually make them better at their job.
Right. The more you know about the tech, the more valuable you are as the industry changes.
That's it. It's about staying ahead of the game, knowing how to use those tools to your advantage. Imagine you're out there and you can just pull up real-time data about different lumber grades on a tablet or look up a whole library of wood species right there on the job. That's the future we're talking about.
Man, that actually does sound pretty cool. So it's not just about muscle anymore, it takes brains too, huh?
Oh, absolutely. A good lumber grader, they need a sharp eye, a quick mind, and they got to be ready to learn new technologies and adapt as the industry changes. That's what keeps things interesting.
I can definitely see that. We've covered a lot of ground here, from how the grading systems work to the role of technology and even sustainability. What's the one thing you hope our listener takes away from all this?
At lumber grading, it's a lot more than people realize. It's a skilled trade with a long history, rooted in craftsmanship, but also embracing all this new technology. Whether you love working with your hands, solving problems, or you're passionate about the environment, there's a place for you in this field.
Well said. So for our listener out there who's thinking, okay, lumber grading, this sounds interesting. How do I learn more?
Hmm.
Where should they start?
There are some great resources out there. Start with the websites of those professional organizations, like the National Hardwood Lumber Association or the American Wood Council. They've got tons of information on grading rules, industry standards, career paths, all of that.
And don't forget about those AI job platforms we talked about, like RoleCatcher. Those can be super helpful for finding the right job and making sure you stand out.
Absolutely. So yeah, do your research, explore those resources, and see where this path takes you. You might be surprised what you find.
I love it. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of lumber grading. Remember, every piece of wood tells a story. And as a lumber grader, you get to be a part of that. Until next time.